Welcome all to Impetus 2020. Today is day 3 of the Global Summit on Artificial Intelligence in Journalism, organized by the Department of Media Studies and Quality Assurance Cell of Nagar College, Maranalloor, Trivandrum, Kerala, India, in association with Artificial Intelligence Journalism for Research and Forecasting, UAE. I'm Manju Mathews, Head of the Department of Media Studies, Nagar College, Maranalloor, Trivandrum. On behalf of our principal, Dr. Jolie Jacob, Director and Manager, Reverend Dr. Tito Berge, CMI, Program Coordinator, Emil Abraham, Thara CB, Reverend Father Tinto Pulinjivelil, CMI, Neenu PK, and student coordinators, Gouri S. Dev and Anup Dev Kishore. We welcome all to the Global Summit. Dr. Mohammed Abdul Zahir, the CEO of AIJRF, our co-organizer, has also joined us. Good morning to our speakers, Guilherme Canela, joining us from UNESCO, Paris, and Neerav Parekh from vPhrase, Mumbai. And good evening to Jonathan Stray, joining us late evening from San Francisco, United States. We had excellent response for this global summit with over 1,200 participants, registrations from all over India and abroad. We appreciate the active participation of participants on day 1 and day 2 of the summit. Participants include media students, media educators, researchers, AI professionals, journalists, and media professionals. On day 2 of the summit, we had Dr. Mohammed Abdul Zahir from AIJRF UAE illustrating how AI journalism and 7G journalism is shaping the future of media. The award-winning author and computational journalist, Dr. Nicholas Diakopoulos, professor at Northwestern University, Illinois, USA, took us through the tools that journalists use to enhance the quality of journalism processes. Blockchain and AI scientist, Dr. Shiva Kinley, joined us from California to demonstrate how these technologies can be effectively used to counter fake photos and ensure truthfulness in photojournalism. The recording of the day 2 sessions are available in our YouTube channel. We have exciting lineup of eminent speakers for today's sessions as well. I kindly request Gouri S. Dev, our final year journalism student, to welcome the speakers and participants. Gouri is selected to moderate panel discussion in the 3rd Global Constructive Journalism conference hosted by the Constructive Institute at Aarhus University, Denmark. Welcome, Gouri.
Good morning. Technology, like art, is a soaring experience of the human imagination. Therefore, technology have a profound impact on the emerging trends in journalism. A hearty welcome to the final day of Impetus 2020, Technologies Empowering Journalism, organized by the Department of Media Studies and IQAC of Nagar College, Trivandrum, India, in association with AI Journalism for Research and Forecasting, UAE. Today also we have 3 principal speakers. Mr. Jonathan Stray, author and AI expert, USA. He has worked for investigative journalism, worked as an editor at Associated Press, a reporter in Hong Kong, and a researcher at Adobe Systems. He will be discussing on the topic AI and tool for good journalism. Mr. Guilherme Canela, UNESCO, Paris, France. He is the chief of the sections of freedom of expression and safety of journalists at UNESCO, headquarters in Paris. He'll be dealing with the topic journalists reporting in this brave new world, challenges and opportunities. Last speaker is Mr. Neerav Parekh, founder and CEO of vPhrase, a natural language generation company. He has received a prestigious Leader in Innovation Fellowship from the Royal Academy of Engineering, UK. He will be discussing on the topic robot journalism. I welcome all the three speakers on behalf of the students and participants who are here with us for the Global Summit Impetus 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Gouri, for the elegant welcome. Best wishes from all of us for your session in the Global Conference on 15th and 16th of December. Our first speaker is Jonathan Stray. Jonathan is a research fellow at the Partnership on AI, focusing on the societal side effects of optimization. He previously taught the dual master's degree in computer science and journalism at Columbia Journalism School. He has worked for ProPublica, the New York Times, and MIT Tech, review producing data-driven investigative reporting on healthcare, consumer debt, campaign finance, news recommendation systems, and algorithms used in the criminal justice system. Jonathan teaches data-driven methods internationally and has lectured at Columbia, Stanford, New York University, Tsinghua, and Fudan University, and publishes research on AI and data visualization in peer-reviewed journals. He previously built several pieces of public interest technology, including Workbench, a platform for reproducible data journalism without coding, and Overview, a natural language processing and visualization system for investigating large sets of documents. He began his career in computer graphics as a research scientist for Adobe Systems before becoming an editor at the Associated Press. He holds a master's in computer science from the University of Toronto and a master's in journalism from the University of Hong Kong. Jonathan is the author of the book, Curious Journalist's Guide to the Data. Jonathan's paper, Making Artificial Intelligence Work for Investigative Journalism, published in Digital Journalism Journal, provide interesting perspective on the limitations of AI and where exactly AI is positioned to help investigative journalism. Dear participants, please use the Mentimeter link in the chat box to ask questions to the speakers. Our moderator, Neenu PK, shall put the questions to the speakers in the Q&A sessions. Now, Jonathan shall take us through the potential of AI technologies in journalism. Welcome, Jonathan.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Manju, very much for that wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be speaking to such an international audience. And I have reviewed some of the recordings from the previous days. This is really a wonderful event. So let's get right into it. One moment while I share my screen here. All right, so today's topic is AI for investigative journalism. You have heard from the other speakers how AI is used in a variety of ways in journalism. I'm going to talk about AI for creating stories, for understanding large sets of documents and data, for journalism which uncovers corruption or holds power to account, investigative journalism. You have seen some of this work already. You saw the story on the BuzzFeed spy planes as well. And here is a list of a few other examples, some of which we will look at tonight. So just to give examples of what is possible, this is a story by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution 5 years ago, I think, which analyzed the records from, yes?
Could you share your screen again? You're not able to see it.
Oh, did I lose was it working and then it stopped? How's that?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
All right. So in this story, what the reporters did is they got the disciplinary records of doctors across 50 states and discovered from these about 100,000 documents that many of these doctors had continued practicing for years after abusing patients. They used AI technology to reduce this pile of 100,000 or more documents to a smaller number that the reporters could read. I think you saw this story earlier. This was using machine learning to find the flight paths of planes that were circling to use surveillance equipment to watch people and protests in the street. This is one of the most recent and most sophisticated examples of AI in investigative journalism. This was from ICIJ, who is an organization I think you have heard of also. And here again, the problem was to go through many, many different documents. One of the challenges in reporting was that the documents were in both English and Portuguese, and many of the reporters in the international team did not speak Portuguese. So they used this technology, the Universal Sentence Encoder, which was created by Google, to allow them to search, to type in a search query in English and find Portuguese documents as well. But the question I really want to ask tonight is, why not more? If AI is so useful for investigative journalism, why aren't there hundreds of stories that use it? And in my work in trying to use AI for journalism, I have come across the following problems, which I will talk about a little bit. And then I'm going to suggest where AI might make a big difference in the near future. The first challenge of using AI for investigative journalism is that the problems that journalists solve are not very well defined very often. So if you read discussions of AI in investigative journalism, you will find claims like, we can find the patterns in documents, or look for stories hidden in the data. This is a very exciting idea, but it's not necessarily a very detailed or concrete description of how the technology is being used. What I mean by that is, what is the journalist actually doing? This is a photograph of an investigative journalist working on a story. You can see they are making notes, they're highlighting passages in the document, they're drinking tea. Two of these things we can do on a computer. But what are they doing? And until we understand precisely what it is that they are doing, it's hard to create software to do it. Some of my work has tried to solve this problem. Journalism. And this was some research I did asking, what were they doing? What type of material were they looking at? And what were they trying to do with it? So for example, this column here, predefined search. This answers simply the question, did they know what they were looking for? Was it a problem of searching for something specifically? Or was it more trying to understand sort of generally what is contained in a set of documents? Answering this question will help us design software and algorithms to solve the problems that journalists actually have. Challenge number 2, getting data is difficult. So for the doctor's abuse story that I showed at the beginning, initially they tried to contact the governments of each of these states and ask for all of these records. Many of them wanted thousands of dollars to pay for this information, even though this is supposed to be public fees. They found other ways around this by scraping the websites and filing Freedom of Information requests, but this is challenging. It's not easy to find data, even if it's supposed to be public. And even if the data is made available to you, it doesn't mean it's convenient to use. So here is a very typical example of the result from a Freedom of Information request, which arrived on paper. And you can see it's a very poor quality printout. It's not even in electronic form. There are some tools which are being built to help with these sorts of problems. So for example, in the US, Muckrock can help automate the process of filing a request for public records. The third challenge is that the data that journalists must work with is very diverse, comes in many different forms, and very dirty. It takes a lot of preparation to work with. And so I will show you a couple examples. I think many of you are familiar with the idea of OCR, optical character recognition, that turns images into text. The image on the left is from a story I worked on in 2010. These were some government documents, and you can see it is not a very good copy. And on the right is what the OCR process made of this document. You can see it really didn't do a very good job at finding the text. It got very confused. Here is a document. It is a police report on what happened one night in Los Angeles from the Los Angeles Police Department. It's not even standard English. It is a strange abbreviation. So normal AI tools for language processing won't work with this type of data because these words are not in the standard vocabulary. Challenge number 4. The problems that journalists face are often unique and difficult, and there are not standard tools to solve them much of the time. This is a document. It is a contract on a New York City hotel. And this document appeared during an investigation of President Trump's business empire. This was an investigation done by Columbia journalism students. And again, these are public records. There were approximately 20,000 documents like this that were relevant to the investigation, collected from all of the buildings that Trump owned. The challenge was to read and organize these documents to see how much money was owed on each building and to whom. This was done by the students manually by putting them all in a spreadsheet like this. So in this case, you can see that each solid color block are all of the documents that were filed on the same day, indicating they belong to the same financial transaction. This is a very specific type of analysis, which you would not use for any other story, which means there are not pre-existing tools which can solve this problem. And the time it would take to build an AI system to do this, if it is even possible, would be more than the time it took to do it by hand. Challenge number 5, the need for accuracy. Journalists have a responsibility to tell the truth, and there are laws which make them liable for saying false things. This is a quote from a paper on this problem, which basically says, after analyzing the laws in several countries, that journalists could face legal liability if they use AI systems that do not produce an accurate output. This means that journalists have to review the output of the systems, which slows down the process and negates some of the advantage of using AI in the first place. Despite that, there are ways of solving this problem. So, for example, going back to the Los Angeles Police Department story, the story here was that many of the crimes were misreported as less serious than they actually were, based on the police department's own definitions. So the journalists went through all of these short descriptions of the crimes, like this one that I showed you earlier, and manually classified it as to whether it was a serious assault or not. Then they used that manually labeled data for 1 year to build a classifier to analyze 8 years of data, 14,000 of these files. They found that the classifier had an error rate of about 20%, meaning it gave the wrong answer 1 in 5 times. But to correct for this, all they did is they changed the total estimated, the orange line there. They just reduced it by 20%. So in this case, they were able to compensate for the error in the algorithm by shifting aggregates so that their story was true. They said there were at least 18,000 aggravated assaults in 2005. Probably there were more, but this is a conservative estimate. It's one way of dealing with this type of accuracy problem. The next challenge, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, is cost effectiveness. Ultimately, AI cannot do anything that a human cannot already do. So then the question is, how much time or money will it save? And we must remember that it takes time to build out the technology as well. This is a slide from a discussion of the same doctor's abuse story that we were talking about earlier. And here they're talking about how long it would take to expand their initial story of a couple hundred doctors to the thousands of doctors all across the country. So in this case, there was a huge benefit. It was very cost effective to spend the time and money to generate a machine learning classifier. You can see there, they used a technique known as logistic regression. And it took them some time to get this working, but it was much faster than reviewing 100,000 documents. Instead, they only reviewed about 10,000 documents, which were the ones that the machine learning model said probably contained a mention of this type of abuse. In general, we should think about not what the computer can do by itself, but what the combination of the computer and the human can do. I think you've heard this from other speakers as well. And I want to think about the problems in 2 axes. One is, how clear is the task? Is it a very straightforward, easy thing to describe? That's the vertical axis. And also, where is the information? So if the information is all in the journalist's head, then there is not enough data, this red portion on the left. And if the information is all in the computer, and the task is very crisply defined, then automated techniques are possible, this purple portion in the corner. But for most of this space, for most of the problems you will want to solve, the information is somewhere between in the computer already and in the journalist's head, and you need the computer and the machine to work together interactively. The last problem is one of the biggest challenges. If you're going to ask a computer to find news, you have to define what is news anyway. Communication scholars have long understood that the idea of newsworthiness, or what makes something a story, is a very deep and complicated idea. So many things happen in the world every day, and journalists have to pick a small number of them as actually a story and then publish those. And even if you ask journalists how they know when something is a story, they may not be able to tell you. It is a very implicit sense. How do we tell a computer what a story is? Well, there are some efforts to define a story mathematically from first principles. Here's one based on looking at the connections between entities in documents. But actually, I suspect this will not work very well in the long run. Instead, you can ask journalists what they believe a story is. This can be challenging. They may not always be able to tell you, or may not be able to tell you in a specific enough way that you can build it into an AI system. There are several possibilities here. So for example, at Reuters, they have a system called Tracer, which analyzes all of the tweets that are produced on Twitter for potential breaking news stories. And if you look closely here, they have this newsworthiness ranking model. This is a machine learning model to decide, does this tweet represent something that a journalist would want to write about? And they built this model by giving it examples of stories that journalists had actually written after they had seen tweets. So you can, as one approach, train a computer to do what journalists are already doing. Now, I've just told you 7 reasons why using AI for investigative journalism is difficult, but I still believe that there is huge potential here, and I would like to tell you where and show you some of my own work in this field. In short, I think AI can be used for data cleaning and preparation in 2 ways in particular that I will show. The reason this is a big opportunity is that data cleaning and preparation takes most of the time on many data projects. And this isn't just data journalism. This is almost anything that is working with data. There are many surveys of this sort. In this case, they saw that cleaning and organizing data was 60% of what data scientists actually do. And journalism is no different. One way in which AI can be used to help organize data is to help the process of merging databases. So this, you may have seen, this is a diagram from the Panama Papers, and they had all of these databases in the leaked data, and they had to connect different databases. So for example, if these 2 items in 2 different databases had a similar name and address, the computer was able to detect that and put a link between them, as opposed to these 2, which have the similar address, but the computer was not able to understand that and link them. These soft links are an indication to a human that 2 databases can be joined in a particular way. Lastly, I want to talk to you about some of my recent work called Deepform. The problem we set out to solve was extracting data from forms. These forms are records of money spent to buy advertising on TV for political candidates. Every election in the United States, so that is every 2 years, about 100,000 of these documents are filed with the Federal Communications Commission, and they are available as public data. You can download these, but we don't have any database or spreadsheet of this information. Even worse, every television station uses a different format. So there's hundreds of different types of forms. Here are 2 more. Journalists have tried to solve this problem before in a variety of different ways. This was a huge crowdsourcing project that ProPublica did in 2012, where they asked people to fill out this information. So you would press that green button, give me a file, it would show you one of these documents, and then you had to type in who was the advertisement for, what was the total amount, when did the advertisement appear on television, and so forth. And through Volunteer Label, they were able to get this information for about 18,000 documents. My team took these 18,000 documents and turned them into training data. Now, at the bottom of the screen here, you see all of these numbers. What this is it's a representation of every word on each page. So the bounding box is the coordinates of a rectangle surrounding each word. And then you can see the actual text there, like the word totals or the number $1,170. And then because we knew what the correct answer was from the previous crowdsourcing work, we were able to compute this other number, which is a 1 if it is the right answer. So this is what the raw data to the algorithm looked like. And we chose to solve this using a deep neural network technique. This is a picture of what this network looked like. I know some of you are familiar with this type of technology and some of you aren't. That's okay. What I want to show you here is that the actual word, whether it is the word totals or the word 1,170 is fed in here, along with the page and where it is on the page, and a few other hand-built features like does the document look like a dollar amount? It goes through several layers of the neural network, and it says for each word on the page, the token just means word, whether this is the answer we are looking for. So each of these outputs will be 0, except for the 1, which is, let's say, the total or the name of the politician. Using this technique, we were able to get almost 90% accuracy extracting the information from these forms automatically. So that's what I see as the biggest near-term opportunity for AI in investigative journalism. Not so much trying to find stories, because that's quite a complicated task, which has many obstacles, as I showed you earlier, but data cleaning and preparation, because this is a much better defined problem. It's very clear what you are supposed to do when you see this form, and takes a lot of time. So as I hope that the Deepform work and ICIJ's work with record linkage demonstrates, there is enormous potential here to increase the power of investigative journalists through appropriate use of AI technology. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan, for the great opening session. My colleague, our moderator, Neenu shall ask the questions shared by the participants.
Hello, sir. I'm Neenu, and I'll be moderating the question answer session. So shall we begin?
Wonderful.
Thank you. This is our first question. It's from Adifatra Agasalim from Indonesia. What is your opinion about deepfake application that went viral? Is it good or bad for journalism based on AI sector?
Well, deepfakes are one specific challenge to journalism and our ability to trust media. It is not the only one, of course. You don't need AI technology to tell a lie. You can just write something that is false or make a fake picture in Photoshop. So in that sense, it's not a new threat. It is different, I think, in that it is much easier to create fake videos than ever before. And so this is something that news organizations, especially fact-checking organizations, are having to learn to deal with. So I'm involved in projects at the Partnership on AI to help build tools to detect deepfakes. So you can maybe get some information about whether a video is suspicious. But more importantly, to train journalists and other fact-checkers around the world about how to deal with the possibility of fake images in this way. So I think this is a reminder that no technology is purely good or purely bad. And deepfakes are, of course, a potential harmful application of AI technology. But the same technology, for example, can be used for art.
Okay, thank you, sir. So we will move on to the next question. This is our next question. Human intelligence is important than fully depending on AI other than data analysis. Do you agree?
Yes, of course. Not only is AI not capable enough to replace journalists, I don't think we would want to. Why would we do that? So as I showed in this, remember the chart with the three sectors? Most of the opportunity for using artificial intelligence is in combination with humans who understand the problem and have information that the computer will never have. So that's really a lot of my research these days, is how to combine human intelligence with machine intelligence.
Thank you, sir. So we will move on to the next question. Can you share your experience when you entered into this journalism career?
Thank you. That's a great question. I can tell you what my experience was. I think other people may have different experiences, so I will try to answer this two different ways. I worked as a computer scientist before I worked as a journalist. I wrote software for computer graphics, but then I decided I wanted to be involved in matters of public interest. So I moved to Hong Kong and I went to journalism school at the University of Hong Kong, and I started working as a reporter there until I eventually got hired for the Associated Press and ended up in New York in their interactive department. And from there, I worked at several news organizations in New York, including ProPublica, and freelanced for a variety of other outlets. So my career in journalism was a little bit different, but maybe very interesting for some people who are watching who are computer scientists or perhaps educated in other STEM disciplines. There is really a need for technical specialists in journalism. Now, there are lots of ways to start a career in journalism. And I suppose maybe the best advice I could give someone who is interested is to specialize. It's pick something that you will become an expert in, whether that is agriculture or physics or international politics. You have to be more knowledgeable and better connected about one particular topic than anyone else. And that is what will get you a job. So find the thing that you can pay attention to for a long time and really get to know.
Thank you, sir. Now, shall we move on to the next question?
Please.
Okay. This is our next question. Please suggest the changes that need to be brought in media education curriculum to have focus for AI and computational journalism to equip media students. Do you want me to repeat the question?
No, that's good. Thank you. I can see it. Well, there are different types of data journalism or computational journalism education. So I would say that at this point, it is important for all journalism students to have a basic understanding of how to do data journalism, where to find public data, how to use a spreadsheet a little bit. And there are lots of good courses on this, including one I taught 2 years ago in collaboration with the University of Hong Kong. So I would like to see all journalism students know how to use a spreadsheet. Beyond that, of course, you can specialize, especially if you can learn to do a little bit of programming. There are many more stories that are possible. So the next level up would be to learn basic Python, maybe in a notebook, to be able to manipulate data with a little more sophistication. And then at the highest level, there are specialist programs. So where I teach at Columbia, there is a double master's degree in computer science and journalism, where you study the courses of both disciplines. And for the most advanced work, this is the type of training that you will need. But I think it's really a question of having different options at different levels.
Thank you so much, sir. So we will move on to the last question of the session. This question is by Aravind, and he says, "Hello, sir. Hope you're doing well. I want to know that how can we analyze the political leaders' hate speeches? Is there any tool for analyzing these things?"
Right. Well, there's a very good question. I think something many people are interested in right now. So thank you, Aravind. Your first challenge will be getting the data. This, I think, is going to be most of the time that you will spend, as I was saying in my talk. So the first thing is to figure out, has anybody made transcripts of these speeches? Can you download the text from somewhere? Or maybe you have to transcribe it yourself, or hire a service to transcribe it. So that's the first challenge, is just getting the data. The next thing you will need to do is find mentions of hate speech. This is complicated in several ways. First of all, you need a definition, right? You need a clear concept of what is and is not hate speech. So you will need there are many experts who try to understand this particular question, and you will need to consult with them, because if your definition is too narrow, you will miss things. If your definition is too broad, you will impinge on freedom of expression. So you must find the things which are actually hate speech. And then the next challenge, if you wish to use a computer to find hate speech, is finding a machine learning model or building a machine learning model which can accurately detect it. This is, to be honest, quite a challenging problem because a lot of this depends on context. It's kind of similar to detecting sarcasm. You know, do I really mean that or am I joking? There are computational techniques which have made some progress. You will also need to consider which languages these are trained in. So, of course, for some languages, you will have much better training data than others. Anyway, it is not a simple task, but it is a worthwhile task, and I wish you luck.
Jonathan, that was really kind of you to take time and answer all the questions from the participants. So thank you so much. Now I'll hand over the session to Manju ma'am.
Thank you, Neenu.
Thank you, Jonathan, for answering all the questions. And that was very inspiring. Great to know about the potential of AI in transforming newsrooms. Artificial intelligence may be brilliant, but they are not free of subjectivity. The evolving technologies will surely shape the journalism of the future. Journalists need good training to master these tools and effectively use for bringing more accuracy in reporting. Thank you very much for joining us late in the evening. Best wishes for all your endeavors. We look forward to having you for advanced session in computational journalism. Thank you once again.
It was my pleasure, Manju.
Yeah. Our next speaker is Guilherme Canela. Guilherme Canela holds the position of Chief of the Section of Freedom of Expression and Safety of Journalists at UNESCO headquarters in Paris. For 8 years, he held the position of Communication and Information Regional Advisor for Latin America and Caribbean at UNESCO Montevideo office. During those years, he performed as Regional Coordinator of the UNESCO Initiative for the Promotion of Democracy and Freedom of Expression in Judicial Systems in Latin America. He is co-author of 10 books and regularly contributes in magazines. Guilherme writes and speaks on various topics related to the human rights, the rights of children, development of democracies. He was research consultant of the United Nations Latin American Institute for the Prevention of Crime and Treatment of Offenders and for the Ayrton Senna Journalism Award. He is member of several advisory boards and juries related to journalism and freedom of expression. He has a BA in International Relations from the University of Brasilia and a master's degree on political science from the University of Sao Paulo. UNESCO has spearheaded the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity since 2012 as the first systematic mechanism with a multi-stakeholder approach to address the issue of safety of journalists and impunity in digital age. As artificial intelligence technologies and tools are set to empower journalists to expose large-scale corruptions, mismanagement of public funds, and cronyism, the threat for journalism and journalists are bound to increase. UNESCO's division of the freedom of expression and safety of journalists have a greater role in protecting the journalists in the new age of artificial intelligence. Guilherme shall speak to us on journalists reporting in this brave new world, challenges and opportunities. Welcome, Guilherme.
Hello, good morning, good evening to Jonathan, and good afternoon already in some parts of Asia and Pacific. Real pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm afraid that you just heard a very exciting hands-on journalist speaking about the issue. Again, it was a pleasure to hear to Jonathan. I have learned a lot. And now you will need to cope with an international bureaucrat speaking about those same issues. So I guess it's not that exciting as was Jonathan's presentation, but I will try my best here to convey the message that UNESCO is discussing on those different issues. So let me see here if I don't face problems in sharing my screen. Let's see. Yes. Are you seeing the presentation?
Yes, but you can make it full screen, sir.
Yeah, sure. Now it's okay, right? Super. So, I mean, it was good that Jonathan underlined one of the aspects of this, that it's how journalists can benefit from those technologies and artificial intelligence to do good journalism and all the challenges involved on that. This is part of the problem. But obviously we need to think this issue as if we were thinking about an ecosystem. So you have an ecosystem of media and technologies and the networks, and journalism is one of the pieces of this puzzle. But we need to understand that the challenge of doing journalism in this, as I said, this to steal the title of Huxley's book, in this brave new world, means also to understand the complexities of this puzzle, the complexities of this media ecosystem. And if we look into the internet ecosystem, it's like a huge cards castle. And this huge cards castle, it's a very complex structure, but also a fragile structure. So if we take one card of this castle, if we try to interfere in one point of this internet ecosystem, we can create a domino effect in the entire card castle. So it's very important to bear that in mind, because, for instance, when journalists are investigating regulatory measures by governments, trying to, even with some good intentions, to stop potentially harmful impacts of this brave new world, like disinformation or hate speech, etc. Journalists also should be able to inform the public what are the potential effects of these regulations in the entire structure of the internet architecture or the more complex media ecosystem. So these two first slides to let us know that this discussion is very complex and has several ramifications that go beyond the journalist world in itself. But it's very important, as Jonathan already did, to think to tackle this problem with a perspective of risks and opportunities. We have problems: disinformation, hate speech, etc. But we also have huge opportunities with these technologies, including artificial intelligence. Opportunities for journalism itself, but also opportunities at large for the society, for the protection and promotion of human rights, for sustainable development, etc. So we need to be very careful in not only concentrating in the problems, in the risks, in the potential harmful effects of new technologies, etc. But also we need to avoid to be naive and say that everything is super relevant, everything will impact positively democracy, etc. And the reality is more complex than that, and will be in some middle point between those two perspectives. So but we could analyze journalism, and the conference that you have put together here, I think it was very successful in doing that from at least three different angles. One angle that was the one that Jonathan just spoke about is how those new technologies can help journalism to do better journalism. How this can help journalists as individuals or news companies as institutions to deliver to the society a better journalism, to fulfill the mission of journalism, that is bring reliable and accurate information, to hold powerful institutions and individuals into account, etc. So this is one aspect that Jonathan spoke very well. I want to insist in those points, but I think it's important to think this as one key pillar of this discussion, particularly for journalism training institutions that are developing their curriculum in terms of connecting the issue of journalism and technology. This is an important pillar. So how we use those technologies to do better journalism. So, for instance, we have a problem like disinformation or the so-called and bad called fake news. And then we have journalists doing fact-checking. And this fact-checking can be helped a lot by automated systems, et cetera, as Jonathan already explained. So one pillar is this, how these technologies can help journalism to deliver better journalism. The other problem that Professor Beckett already discussed, I think, in the very first webinar of this series, is how artificial intelligence impacts the discussion of the news industry in general. So there are several elements for this discussion. One of them, for instance, is how this might impact the existence of journalism itself. So several of those technologies are having a huge impact in the news industry, and this impact is unfortunately generating bad side effects, closing of news media outlets. Journalists are losing their jobs in several countries, etc. Obviously, this is not only fault of technology, but the technology is part of the puzzle. So first pillar, how technology impacts the journalism as a profession, the delivery of journalism, how this can improve the quality of journalism. The second pillar is how technology impacts the news industry in itself, and how this can impact the way of doing journalism, the existence of journalism, how will be the journalism of the future and the news industry of the future. But I guess that you already discussed this as well. So I will concentrate in the third pillar of this problem, that is when journalists need to report on those issues in itself. So it's not using artificial intelligence as a tool for better reporting, but it's actually discussing new technologies, including artificial intelligence and machine and automated services, etc., as a part of the equation of democracies, sustainable development, human rights, etc. So this is obviously in the core of UNESCO mandate, our discussion of artificial intelligence and other technologies with a humanistic approach based on human rights challenges, based on ethical challenges, etc. So this is when I will concentrate the rest of my discussion here with you. So the first element is how the journalists should pay attention in the human rights angle of this discussion, which means that important questions on how those technologies affect privacy, freedom of expression, access to information, or the right to education, etc., are very important questions that should be in the agenda of journalists right now and for the coming years. The other important angle is how algorithms impact all of this from an ethical perspective. So how algorithms can impact, or the way they are structured, how this can impact elections, for instance, or how they can foster, unfortunately, hate speech or hate content, or how the logic of algorithms are impacting in the waves of disinformation, and how this can impact the health issues, as we are seeing right now for this pandemic. So this is a second angle. Journalists should understand the logic of the algorithms, should understand how they are being applied for the different platforms, and what are the impacts of this in very concrete issues for our daily lives. Another connected element is the logic of big data and micro-targeting. So this has a huge implication, for instance, for elections and therefore for democracies. But again, this has implications for several issues related to our privacy, therefore for human rights and sustainable development. So this is another important element that journalists should pay attention when they are reporting on the impacts of technologies for our lives. Obviously, these things, as Jonathan said, also can have potentially good implications. It's not only bad. So remember, we need to always discuss in terms of risks and opportunities. The other logic here that journalists reporting on those issues should pay attention is the logic of the markets. So we are talking here about huge and powerful companies with interests in the system. If you look into this graph, you see the 5 biggest companies in the world in 2008, which historically speaking is yesterday, and the 5 huge, most valued companies today, 2018, 10 years later. And there you can imagine that who they are, and they are completely different of the companies that were in the top of the list 10 years ago. So journalists should be prepared to investigate this as well, how those companies is interfering in the public sphere. Again, interfering not only negatively, also positively, but they should be part of the journalistic equation. As I said in the beginning, it's also important to pay attention on the logic of the architecture of the internet. Those are the so-called 3 layers of the internet. Those layers are interconnected, but they have different implications in the discussion and how this impacts all the issues that we have been touching here throughout this series of seminars. One of the questions of the participants to Jonathan was already related to this. You journalists also should be able to investigate the logic of particular technologies like deepfake, for instance, or like facial recognition. What are the implications for that for human rights, for privacy, for elections, for freedom of expression, for access to information? So this is another element of this. If you are building a curriculum for journalists to investigate or to be prepared to report on those new issues, this should be considered. So almost reaching the end of my initial remarks here. Journalists are already doing that. So, for instance, this very interesting reporting by BBC from, a few years ago. It's entitled "How Maths Can Get You Locked Up." The BBC was investigating a case in Wisconsin where they were using automated algorithms to take decisions about people going to jail or not. So journalists were investigating that and reporting to the public what are the risks of using technology like that in the judicial systems in different parts of the world, in this case in the US. This joint report by the Observer, The Guardian, the New York Times was about the so-called scandal of Cambridge Analytica. Again, journalists going deeper in discussing the impacts of micro-targeting and the use of the data that we offer to the platforms and apps, and how the impacts of this in elections and other areas of our lives. So journalists going deeper in the discussion of technologies and in its impacts in society. But also journalists are involved in innovative projects that are not necessarily the daily news media delivery or more long-term investigative reporting. They are also involved, for instance, in producing documentaries, like those 2 examples from Netflix, one about the Cambridge Analytica story, and the other more recently about the several challenges of the internet industry regarding impacts in our lives, again, in democracy, in privacy, in freedom of expression. So those are obviously concrete examples on how journalists reporting deeply on the issues related to the technology can be an interesting way forward and the needed way forward for the journalist itself. So in a nutshell, for UNESCO, how we see the way of framing those challenges in a broader perspective, not only for journalists, for all the other stakeholders, journalists, but also governments, regulators, judicial operators, internet companies, civil society organizations. It's through this idea of thinking this new world on focusing on 4 pillars. One, we need to have always a human rights-based approach, which also includes the ethical components. The other, we need to think this architecture from a perspective of openness. We want an open internet instead of a closed internet. The other challenge is accessibility. All of these only make sense if people can really be connected. And it's not only the connection to the grid, to the network, but it's also accessibility in terms of people with disabilities, linguistic accessibility, etc., and the quality of the content we can access, etc. And finally, that all of this should be think under an umbrella of a multi-stakeholder engagement. So it's not only about including governments or journalists or regulators or civil society organizations or engineers. It's about including everyone in this discussion. And finally, back to journalism, this shouldn't be seen as a specialized role of journalists specialized in covering reporting on technologies. This affects the work of journalists in all fields. So if you are a journalist today specialized in reporting on health issues, if you don't understand the challenges of the so-called disinfodemic to the health crisis, you are not reporting well to your audiences on the health issues. So we need to really pay attention on those technological challenges, regardless if we are journalists reporting specifically on technology or if we are journalists reporting in several other areas of our daily lives. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Guilherme, for your great perspective. And we have a question and answer session. My colleague and our moderator, Neenu PK, shall moderate.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
I'm Neenu, and I'll be moderating the question answer session. So shall we begin?
Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Our first question is this. Sir, who's the motivation behind you when you entered into journalism?
Well, actually, I'm not a journalist. As I said, I'm an international bureaucrat. I'm an international civil servant working for United Nations and particularly for UNESCO for several years. But my entire career was dedicated to protect journalism, to protect freedom of expression. So although as I said, I'm not a journalist from the very beginning of my career, I understood the importance of journalism for our democracies and for protecting and promoting human rights. So I'm very glad to have many journalist friends all over those years and have been working with them very closely. But the motivation was actually the strong belief that journalism is essential for protecting our democracies and fostering human rights of all. So this is the initial motivation from my perspective, that is not as a journalist, but as a protector of journalists.
Thank you, sir. So now we will move on to the next question of the session. And okay. So this is our next question. Do you think that the personalization of news and news delivered with commercial interest undermine the essence of journalism?
Well, if I understood correctly the question, I think that the problem of the personalization of news, of our news feed, that the logic of the algorithms foster, is not only a problem for journalism, it's a problem for our democracies. These effects of the personalized news feed through our social media networks is one of the reasons, it's not the only one, that is generating what we call the bubbles of information, or the echo chambers. So what does that mean? That unfortunately people are more and more encapsulated in what they already believe it's true. So they are not subject to a dialogue with others that might have different views of what they already believe. They don't read a newspaper with a perspective that this is ideologically different of the newspapers that they received automatically in their news feed. So this is a serious problem of the current moment, and we need to find a ways to create communicating channels between those different information bubbles. People should open their bubbles and started looking to the neighbor and saying, well, maybe this person doesn't agree with me, but I should listen their argument. I should listen what they have to say to me. And this is a real challenge for journalism, but for society as a whole.
Thank you, sir. Now we will move on to the next question of the session. As we know that nowadays, online harassment of women journalists are happening in social media. How to use artificial intelligence to curb the online harassment in the social media? This question is by Aravind.
Very good question. Actually, UNESCO is developing right now a global research on this very topic. And one of the tools we are using is precisely big data analysis to understand this phenomenon. So there are at least two key ways. One, using artificial intelligence and automated services and big data to understand the phenomenon, because we need also to have the correct data to build evidence-based policy. So, and artificial intelligence can help a lot on that. So we know that there is growing online harassment against women in general and women journalists in particular, but we don't know the characteristics of this phenomena, and then this big data analysis can help us to understand that. Then there is a more complex thing, that it's if automated services should moderate some of those contents. And that's a big question mark, and we should, having the data, it's the first step, we should then discuss if this next step is necessary, and if it is, how exactly it should be implemented with lots of transparency and accountability.
Thank you for answering that question. Now we will move on to the next question of the session. AI can help in uncovering large-scale corruption. Do you see journalists now have scientific tools to support their reporting?
Indeed, they as Jonathan was saying, indeed, they have more tools, hopefully tools that are based in a scientific methodology to uncover corruption, for instance, but also human rights violations, also environmental crimes, etc. But we should also underline that all of this is not new. I mean, journalism from the very beginning, even before all those technologies, should be based in scientific methods. I mean, investigative journalism in defining a hypothesis, trying to check this hypothesis, etc., was done like that since the beginning of journalism, if it was a good investigative reporting. So what technology can help is to amplify the size and the velocity of this endeavor. But the essence is the same essence. We need to do that in a quality way using a scientific approach 100 years ago or now in doing good journalism.
Thank you, sir, for answering that question. Can we move on to the next question?
Please.
Thank you. The next question is by Shahjahan, can artificial intelligence deal with the context of news while reporting fake news? Since context is very important in news, how will we set the right algorithm?
Well, this is obviously, as Jonathan was also saying, the artificial intelligence, particularly in journalism and other similar endeavors in human life, does not replace at all the human intelligence in this picture and in this puzzle. And the question also particularly touches one of the specific elements that the particular analysis of the journalist looking into the actual situation is irreplaceable. It's the context, it's the cultural context, is the history of that particular situation, etc. So, for instance, you take a very complex issue. They mentioned the fake news, disinformation. That is it's a complex issue, but let's take one even more complex. That is the case of hate speech, for instance. Some words that are considered and indeed are hate and can even generate concrete violence in some regions of the world, they are meaningless in other regions of the world. They don't mean anything. They are not perceived as hate. They are not perceived as an incitement to violence. So an automated service will never grasp these kind of differences, these kind of cultural differences, linguistic differences, in the way a human looking into the actual situation can notice. Obviously, the automated services can help. We can make the algorithm even more perfect to understand these kind of differences, but we need to combine the wisdom of the journalists actually observing the situation with the help that the automated services can offer.
Thank you, sir. Now we will move on to the last question of the session. And the question is by a student of our college. Instagram algorithms prevent people discovering stories and posts which are against their belief system, almost as if they are biased. How can we prevent such situations? This question is by Ram Gopal.
Yeah, very good question. I mean, there are several ways of answering this. I will only mention two. One, as I tried to explain during my presentation, I think this is also a job for you journalists. I mean, you need to report more on those challenges. You need to bring to the attention of your audiences how the technologies and the algorithms are potentially creating these biased situations, as I said, these echo chambers or these information bubbles, etc. So there is a duty of journalism to look into this context and to investigate how social media platforms or specific applications or technologies are potentially generating this bias. So this is one. There is another thing that is also one of the ways of resolving this problem. That is how we engage the internet companies in a discussion about these challenges. And one of the specific elements for these and in the view of UNESCO is how we increase the transparency of those companies regarding these decisions, these automated decisions, as the one mentioned in the question. So we need to go deeper in several discussions, but one of them is the discussion of transparency and accountability of the internet platforms.
Thank you, sir. With that, we have come to the end of our question and answer session. Thank you so much for taking time to answer all the questions from the participants. Now I'll hand over the session to Manju ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, pleasure.
Thank you very much, Guilherme, for being very patient in answering all the questions. And UNESCO has evolved a great strategy to support journalism in the digital age, which is essential to realizing sustainable development goals. Good wishes for your efforts in safeguarding journalism and strengthening democracies around the world. The thought for having this global summit started with a discussion with Guy Berger, who in fact suggested and connected me with you. Your guidance and support helped me to plan this as a 3-day global summit. A word of gratitude to both of you. Thank you, Guilherme, for joining us. We'll definitely have you for our future events.
Thank you. A pleasure. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Neerav Parekh. Neerav Parekh is the founder and CEO of vPhrase, a natural language generation company. Neerav has more than 15 years of experience in working in different roles and setting up businesses in technology, marketing, and finance. After completing the MBA from NMIMS, Neerav worked at Citibank and then co-founded startups in the technology and marketing space before founding vPhrase. Neerav has received the prestigious Leader in Innovation Fellowship from the Royal Academy of Engineering, United Kingdom. He's a thought leader in the areas of business intelligence and data science. He's an advisor to institutes teaching data science and regularly speaks at events, including those by the Government of India, CII, NASSCOM, ASSOCHAM, and more. Natural language generation, NLG, is one of the key applications of AI technology in content. Neerav shall talk about robot journalism. Welcome, Neerav.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome and a fantastic introduction, Manju. It is my pleasure to be here along with such esteemed dignitaries. I was hearing the talks earlier by Jonathan and by Guilherme. I think it was fantastic. And they spoke about how journalists need to get into investigative journalism. They need to do data-driven journalism. But I guess the situation today is that there are so many routine stories which the journalists are supposed to do that it leaves them with very little time to actually get into more interesting, more challenging, more meaningful kind of journalism, right? So what I'll do is I'll quickly share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to take you through the application of artificial intelligence in the newsroom. So there are plenty of things for which AI is being used in journalism, in newsroom. And over the last 3 days, I think all the speakers have talked about how artificial intelligence can be used to improve the quality of journalism that is happening. What I'm going to focus on is not on those interesting and challenging things. I'm going to focus on the routine things which the journalists have to do and how AI can help us automate those routine things so that everyone is free to do more interesting and challenging work. So I have put across an earnings story on the screen. Now, if you read through this earnings story and try to figure out what exactly is special in this, I'll give you a minute to do that. So it reads like a typical earnings story which is written, right? It talks about the stats, how things are moved, whether profitability is increased or not, and a lot of other things. Now, this seems like a normal earnings story which we typically read in newspapers. The only difference is that this news story is written by a robot using the data that you see on the screen. Now, robots have started writing a lot of stories. And we are not talking about stories being written in labs for demo purpose. Robots are writing stories which you and I are reading in newspapers, on websites, on portals. These are stories in production. We're not talking about experiments and demos and things in labs. It is actually in production. So robots have started writing a lot of stories. So earning stories is something that I just showed. They're writing stories on weather. They are writing stories on the stock markets, crime reports, sports reporting as well. A lot of stories are being written on sports, cricket especially, and then talk about real estate price trends in a lot of different aspects. So one common thing that you'll see on all the stories that are being written in production right now is that all these stories have data at their base, as their base. So these are all data-driven stories. And how are these robots writing these stories? The technology which is being used is called natural language generation. This is a technology where machines use non-linguistic input. So any input which is in form of data uh, is taken as input, and it writes language basis that. So essentially what the machines do is they analyze the data, draw out the insights, build a story around those insights, and then write that story using normal language. So this is how robots write language. And how well can these robots write? So an analysis was done and a research was done where the stories written by human journalists and those written by robots were evaluated on 12 descriptors of quality and credibility. And what was found was that stories which were written by humans were very well written, coherent, and pleasant to read, whereas those written by the robots were informative, accurate, trustworthy, and objective. So you see, by default, the kind of coherence and the kind of quality of writing that human journalists can do is difficult to match by the robots for now. But the way they write and what they write essentially is much more trustworthy, much more accurate and objective as compared to human writing. There was another study which was done where articles written by both journalists and robots were mixed up, and people were asked to identify which article is written by whom. So as you'll see, the article which was actually written by software, 10 people identified it as being written by a human journalist. And likewise, when an article was written by a journalist, actually 10 people again identified it as written by software. So what it tells us is it's very difficult to accurately identify who has written the article, whether it was written by a human or by a software. So can these robots replace journalists? I know this is a very sensitive topic, and I'm sure that most of people in the audience are somewhere scared about the whole thing. But I think there is no point running away from this discussion. I think this is something that we should put it right in the center of the table and discuss about it. Robots definitely are automating a lot of work that human journalists are currently doing. And why are the publishers preferring robots? Because one, they're more accurate. Obviously, because they're machines, they don't tend to make mistakes which a human would typically make, right? They're accurate, they're fast, they conform to standards, and then they can operate at an enormous scale. So robots can essentially free up the journalists from doing all the routine stories, and they can then focus on more challenging kind of work. Like I said right at the start, everyone wants to do stories which are investigative, which are data driven, which are challenging. Nobody wants to write routine stories like earnings analysis, weather reports, and those kind of reports. So I think robots are best suited for automating all that kind of work, all those kind of stories. But what robots cannot do, certainly, is that they cannot write non-routine stories. So think about it. If we talk about any event, suppose the prime minister visited a border area and spent time with troops, there's no way a robot can write a story on that. And likewise, if you think what differentiates us as humans from these robots, and where robots would find it really difficult to match up to us as humans, is in creativity angle. So humans by default are creative, and we can think of a lot of different creative things that we can write about. But if you look at robots, for them, it is very objective, methodical way of doing things. They always lack creativity. So anything and everything that requires creativity, I think humans will always be better than what the robots can offer. So I think what we as journalists, human journalists, should focus on is focus on our strengths and do the kind of work that typically robots would find difficult to do. focus our energies, focus our training, focus our experience on those kind of fields, and not limit ourselves to doing routine kind of work, which eventually would get automated by robots. And artificial intelligence is not just automating the stories. It is also helping the news publishers in other aspects as well. Biggest benefit of robo journalism, if you think about it, when we look at the amount of content which needs to be produced in this digital world, I think personalization at scale is huge. Robots are able to write stories at a scale that we humans can never imagine. They can publish thousands of stories within seconds. And these stories can be personalized in real time, depending on the persona of the reader. So that gives a very strong benefit to publishers, because content is being published in tons, and it's difficult for humans to match up, to write these stories from different angles. The same story from different angles for different personas is difficult. But with robots, you can do that. And you think of native advertising, I think robots with the strength of personalization can do wonders on the native advertising field. So I was telling you about automation of stories, but artificial intelligence can also certainly help news publishers in different things. So one common problem that all news publishers have to deal with, like any organization, is to deal with the tons of data. So if you are into TV viewership, TV channels, then they have to deal with a lot of data which comes in from BARC and other ratings agencies. And then if you are in news publication, again, you have data coming in from market research organizations, plus you have data coming in from the website. So there's a lot of traffic data which comes in. And organizations which are able to analyze and synthesize this data quickly are able to take decisions which are in real time, and are able to get them better ROI. So organizations which are not using intelligence, are not using the real current age tools, they tend to spend a lot of time in creating reports. They spend days in creating reports, and by the time they take decisions basis of reports, that data is already outdated. So AI is helping in that as well. So what you see on the screen is a viewership report on English movies category. Now, tools using AI are able to create the report. So the report that you're seeing on the left is actually machine written report. So it is analyzing all the data of the TV shows that were run, the movies that were run over the last week, over the historical period, which movies did well, which did not, what time slots were working well, what was the trend like, is the viewership increasing, is the viewership decreasing. This kind of data keeps coming on a daily, on a weekly basis, and analyzing all this data to quickly understand what is performing and what is not performing is critical. And tools with their intelligence are able to help the teams write this kind of reports in real time, so that they're able to make the decisions faster. Likewise, intelligence is also helping, AI is also helping in competitive analysis, checking how are the competitors doing, which of the programs are doing well, which are not doing well, which ones are growing, which ones are going down, how are your own programs performing against their programs. All this kind of intelligence, all this data is always available. It is about how much of this data can you use, and how soon can you use this to help you make the right decisions. Then obviously the revenue stream, right? The revenue comes from ads. Subscription is going down significantly. Ads is where people are making the revenue. And ensuring that your sales team has the right kind of data to go and talk to the advertisers, knowing which advertisers are increasing spends with you, which advertisers are decreasing spends with you and increasing their spends with some competitor. All that data is available in the market. It is about using that data and creating reports for your sales teams, so that they are able to generate the right kind of advertising revenue for you. So like you see, artificial intelligence is not just useful in automating stories, but it is also useful in making sense of data for the organizations, so that they can perform better. So NLG and AI are revolutionizing traditional journalism, and they're doing it well. There are organizations which are already using this. across the board, both in India and outside. We ourselves are also working with a few publishers. I'm done with the presentation, but I'll quickly close with some bit about us as a company. So I am a founder of vPhrase. We built an AI robo journalist called Fraser. Fraser writes data-driven news stories and leadership reports in seconds. You can have a look at it and read more about it at fraser.ai. So I'll show you a few examples of the articles that Fraser writes. So there are a couple of articles on the screen: earnings analysis on Infosys. This is actually live on websites, publisher websites, written by Fraser. Bullion prices coverage. Then two other articles. So we just had Bihar elections happen. So the content on Bihar elections was automated using Fraser. And Fraser also wrote live commentary on IPL matches that were happening. So these are all articles which are in production, which are live on the websites of these publishers. So we're not talking about, like I said, we're not talking about experiments in labs. These are all things in production. So robos have already started writing content for news publishers. So these are some examples of articles, the reports that I showed earlier. This report, this report, this report. All these reports are also written by Fraser for our clients. So robo journalists are already in the market. They're already writing stories. And like I said, we as human journalists will need to make peace with that, and we'll need to focus on our strengths and work in areas where we think that robots would find it difficult to match. But for all the routine work, I think journalists themselves should start using such tools. So if I was a journalist and if my manager asked me to write stories on earnings analysis, I would look at a tool like Fraser and I'll automate that work. And I ask my manager to give me some more investigative kind of work. So that is how I would look at it, rather than fighting robo journalists and trying to say, no, these robos are not writing well and I can write better. I think the economics of the whole thing would not make it a good case to fight. The cost that these robots will come at, the speed with which they can write, and the amount of content that they can write is humanly impossible to match. So with that, I would like to conclude my presentation, and I'll be happy to take questions, whatever are available. Thank you.
Sorry for the delay. Thank you, Neerav, for the great insights. And my colleague, Neenu PK, shall moderate the question and answer session.
Sure.
Hello, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Neenu, and I'll be moderating our question and answer session. So shall we begin the session?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the first question is, sir, what all qualities should a journalist have when he or she is in this particular career? And please share your experience when you entered into this career.
So I'll answer the second part first. I am not a journalist. I'm a business person. I built a technology that is able to automate some of the work that journalists do. So by default, I have no background in publishing. I'm from a software background. I'm from an IT background. Now, the first part of the question, I think, was what qualities should upcoming journalists focus on, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, like I said throughout during the presentation, that the upcoming journalist or any journalist should not focus on challenging the robots or fighting with the robots in terms of competing with them and saying the content that I write is better, or I can do this better or faster, whatever. It's not going to work. They should focus on things that the robots cannot do. And the earlier two speakers talked about so many things, right? So I would rather focus on those areas. I would rather focus on investigative kind of journalism. Use these tools, use the technology to augment the work that you're doing, rather than competing with it. So that is how I would look at the whole thing. I would try to not look at routine kind of work, routine kind of stories, and think that I would be able to build a career with that. I would work on the more challenging kind of journalism work.
Thank you, sir. Now we will move on to the next question of our session. This is our next question. AI is lacking in creativity, as you said. How far it affects the effectiveness in journalism?
I think it does to a large extent, but for a certain kind of stories, right? So, like I said, there are a lot of routine stories. You don't need creativity for those kind of stories. So there it doesn't affect at all. But all the other kind of stories, except for the ones that I talked about, those kind of stories where there's a huge amount of context, there's a huge amount of subjective factors, so huge number of subjective factors which are at play. I think a machine or an algorithm will never be able to match that. And how you put the whole story around, how you build that story, how you so whole storytelling aspect in itself requires a lot of creativity, right? An average storyteller versus a good storyteller. We in India watch so many movies, right? Now, so why is it that some movies are super hit and while some movies don't work so well? And one common factor that you'll see is that although stars in the movies make a difference, but if you have a strong storyline, even average stars tend to give you super hits, right? So story is the most important thing. That is what everyone wants, and the way we as humans can view stories, I think, is difficult to match for robots purely because it requires a lot of creativity.
Thank you, sir. We'll move on to the third question. Automation is a necessary evil considering the information overload and the frantic pace at which news is disseminated. How do you think this will shape up the journalism sphere?
So I totally agree that it's a necessary evil. I think everyone, you already seeing that news publications are struggling to earn the revenue the way they used to earn before the whole before the whole industry went online, right? Before the taste of people changed, when it was like a physical newspaper which was being delivered, physical magazines which were being delivered, you would make money through subscription revenue. But now with everything available online, and with the way the consumers are spoiled for choices, and the way generally just look at our own phones, right? How many of the apps that you use are actually paid apps? All of us use majority of the apps on our phone are free apps. And likewise, we just got, like I said, we are spoiled as consumers. We got used to everything for free, and we are expecting even the news content to come to us for free, but there's actual effort which is required to generate that kind of content. So in such a scenario, obviously the publishers and the news organizations would try to cut down their costs because they don't have the kind of revenues that they used to have earlier. And when they want to cut down the cost, the first thing that they'll try to do is to automate the content that is being created so that they can create more content at lesser cost. So that is what they'll try to do first. And because of that, obviously automation is going to come in, and you can't do much over there. So I would just repeat the same thing. What can you do in this evolving sphere as a journalist is to ensure that you are focusing on strengths of a human and building on those strengths and not trying to get into routine basic kind of work. I think that is all I can say on that.
Thank you for answering. Now we will move on to the next question. This is our next question. How can natural language generation help in creating stories in multiple languages in a country like India?
So I think automation certainly, this is one of the strengths of machines. So again, we are our tool phraser. It's also able to write in multiple languages. It already writes in 4 different languages. So see, that is the beauty of it, right? Once you build the libraries, then it will just keep on churning out content. And because India has so many different languages, again, having independent writers in those languages and expecting them to translate all the content in those languages is a huge ask. It's an expensive ask. But with machines, it can definitely do that. So we already have clients for whom we write in multiple languages because they have audiences in different parts of India. They have customers in different parts of India. So they want communication to be in multiple languages. And we automate that communication for them. So in fact, it's easier with technology than it is otherwise. It's less expensive with technology than it is otherwise.
Thank you, sir. Shall we move on to the next question? Okay. This is our next question. Sir, what skills or competencies should one acquire to get into AI journalism sector?
I think obviously everything that you as a journalist learn is important, but at the same time, I heard one of the speakers talk about it, that you should not run away from technology. You should not think that, no, I have never worked on any software programs. I've never worked on technology. It's a black box for me. No, I want to keep away from it. The more you run away from it, the more it will affect you in a negative way. I think you should make peace with it. If even if till date you not worked with technology and you always kept away from it, there's no harm in starting today. Try to understand how it works. Try to understand how tools work. How do they work? There's no rocket science there. We're not flying rockets over here, right? So there's no rocket science there. It is, the more comfortable you become with those technologies, the easier it would be for you to work with them and to take advantage of them. See, like I said, it's not that these tools can be used by organizations at an organization level alone. You can use them at a personal level as well. If you have X number of stories that you need to write, use the tools to automate those stories and write more stories so that you can earn more for your content. So there's nothing stopping you. I think as in this world, I think you cannot keep away from technology. You will have to embrace technology. Even if you not learned it so far, try to learn the technology now. Try to use those tools. Try to understand those tools, and I'm sure that there will be plenty of people who will be willing to help you out if you want to embrace the technology. I'm 100% sure.
Thank you, sir. We will move on to the next question.
So, before we move on to the next question, in fact, I was speaking with Manju about this. So we at vPhrase, she asked if we can conduct some workshops. So we are happy to conduct workshops where we can actually demonstrate how to use Phraser and how to use technology to automate work. So we can conduct those sessions for journalists if everyone is okay. So we are happy to do that.
Thank you, sir. That was really kind of you, and we will let you know where the stakes. So,
Sure.
Manjuman will contact you about that. So now, can we move on to the next question?
Yes, please.
Thank you, sir. This is our next question. What are the 3 biggest limitations of Phraser?
I think the limitations remain the same, like I said, about any AI technology. So it obviously lacks creativity. Phraser specifically will be able to cover everything that the data covers. So if there is anything which is outside of data, it will not know. So if you're writing a story and if you're providing some data to write that story, then it will be able to write a very good story on that data. But if there are any elements that you want to include in that story beyond that data, it will not be able to include those elements. So I think these 2 limitations, one is the lack of creativity and the other one is it is restricted to what the data includes. If things are not included in data, then it will not be able to comment on it.
Okay, sir. Now we will move on to the last question of the session. This is our last question. Can AI reduce bias in news content? What if someone programmed it to be biased? That will be not at all different from the situation we are in right now. Can we reduce that in some way? This question is by Ram Gopal.
I think, see, again, this is a fairly open topic right now. It's a big debate which is happening right now in the world. I think these algorithms will actually increase the impact of bias. See, algorithms are what? They are software programs, right? And these are created by someone. So in fact, any algorithm, if a very, very basic way of looking at it is just an opinion of its creator. So an algorithm will be as biased as the creator wants it to be. And it can pick up bias from pre-written content. So because see, most of these algorithms are trained on content which is already present in the world. And you know all the kind of biases which exist in our current world, right? So if the algorithms are trained on biased content, then what they'll learn is also bias and what they'll reproduce is also bias. So I think it is, and because they are algorithms, they are machines, they're going to produce so much of content. I think it is just going to increase the overall impact and the problem of bias and the biased content and echo chambers and all, it's just going to increase manifold.
Thank you so much. And with that, we come to the end of our question and answer session. It was really nice talking to you, and thank you so much for taking the time to answer all the questions from the participants.
Thank you so much for having me here, giving this talk. I'm so happy to be in this august company of the kind of speakers that you invited. I'm really happy to be here.
Pleasure is ours, sir. Now I'll hand over the session to Manju ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Neerav. As you said, we will plan workshop. Okay, and it is great to know how natural language generation is working best in creating content. And newsrooms shall benefit by adopting NLG for doing the mundane repetitive tasks, while journalists can focus on core issues which require human intelligence. Thank you for the great informative session. We look forward to having you for specialized training session for media students and journalists. Thank you, Neerav, for your valuable time.
Thank you so much.
Now, I kindly request Anup Kishore, our final year journalism student, to say a word of thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. A very good afternoon to all. Myself, Anup Kishore. I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks of the IMPETUS 2020, Technologies Empowering Journalism, organized by the Department of Media Studies and IQAC, Nagar College, Trivandrum, India, in association with AI Journalism for Research and Forecasting UAE. Let me first of all start by giving glory to the Almighty God for making this global summit a resounding success. First and foremost, I must mention our deep sense of appreciation to all the speakers who were the backbone of IMPETUS 2020. Starting from Professor Vasudeva Verma, who is a professor and a former dean at IIIT Hyderabad. Thank you, sir, for sharing your insights on how technologies are shaping news industry. Further, we are grateful to Professor Charlie Beckett, founding director of Polis, for demonstrating his vision of journalism AI and making us understand how AI technologies can benefit newsroom. Next, I may like to express our sincere thanks to Francesco Marconi, who is a computational journalist and the co-founder of information company Applied Excel, for giving an excellent coverage on how AI is set to transform journalism. I also wish to express our sincere gratitude to Dr. Mohammad Abdul Sahir, Assistant Professor in Digital Public Relations and Artificial Intelligence Journalism, for helping us to understand the future of media beyond AI technologies. We are very grateful to Dr. Nikolaos Diakopoulos, Associate Professor in Communication Studies and Computer Science at Northwestern University, for conveying his analysis of AI work in journalism. My heartfelt thanks to Dr. Shiva Kindley, founder and CEO of TrueDat, for the demonstration of a great tool, TrueDat for photojournalism. A big thank you to Jonathan Street, teaches the dual masters in degree in computer science and journalism at Columbia University, for making us understand the use of AI and tools for good journalism. Thank you, sir. Next, I convey my sincere gratitude to Guilherme Canela, holds the position of Chief of the Section of Freedom of Expression and Safety of Journalists at UNESCO headquarters in Paris, for providing his vision on journalist reporting in this brave new world. And we also would like to acknowledge our gratitude to Neerav Parekh, founder and CEO of vPhrase, for exposing his insights in robot journalism. I also extend my thanks to all the coordinators and the Department of Media Studies and IQAC, Nagar College, Trivandrum, India, in association with AI Journalism for Research and Forecasting, UAE, for their enormous cooperation in the organization of this event. Last but not least, we would like to thank all the participants for their enthusiastic participation in making the Global Summit a resounding success. Once again, I thank you all for your valuable attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Anup. That was a great word of gratitude. We are concluding Impetus 2020, the Global Summit on Artificial Intelligence in Journalism. Our humble effort was for bringing together world's best thought leaders, researchers, industry experts, and academicians working in emerging technologies shaping the future of journalism. The 3-day sessions provided great insights on artificial intelligence, technologies, and tools. Hope you all benefited with the sessions. We intend to conduct specialized training events to equip media students and journalists to upskill and effectively use artificial intelligence and computational tools for journalism. Human journalists have greater role to strengthen democracies, check corruption, and lead societies to excel through good journalism. On behalf of all the speakers, we extend our sincere gratitude to the participants for making this global summit a great success. Certificate of participation shall be provided to all participants who fill in the feedback form. The link to the feedback form is shared in the chat box. Stay safe, have a great day. Team Nagar, Maranalloor, Trivandrum, signing off till we meet again. Thank you.